The third day of national rail strikes called by the RMT over pay and conditions.
You'll be on the union? I don't think you can hear you. You'll be on the union? Yes!
Hi, good evening. It's Monday, so of course it's Redline TV. And tonight we're going to be looking at mass action or demonstrations. There's been quite a conversation, particularly on the left, about this. And there are many people who have been critical about the mass movement. Many people are supportive. What is it about? Is it effective? Is it something that the left should be more supportive of? Is it a useful strategy for change? That's the kind of thing that we're going to be discussing tonight.
Hi, yes, we want to look at specifically the dynamic between direct action on the one side and sort of political parties, traditional style of organization where, you know, with the working class, the strikes, etc., the political parties. And we want to look at how these trends work together, if they can work together, and how. And we're very pleased to have with us as a first guest, Laura Johnson. Hello, nice to meet you. Nice to see you. You are from Just Stop Oil UK, and that's one of the campaigns that they're relatively new. You've highlighted the climate catastrophe like very few campaigns before, and thrown policing into chaos in the process, which is always nice to see. Your tactics, though, of blocking motorways, etc., is not always uncontroversial, and we want to discuss this a little bit with you. First, though, we'd like to talk to you quickly about COP27, which was in the news for months and months and months. It was hailed as this is going to be fantastic. Probably unsurprisingly for us, it wasn't. What's your brief assessment of what's come out of COP27, Laura?
Okay, well, thank you, Tina and Jackie, for having me on. Well, it was basically a cop-out, wasn't it? Let's be honest with you. It's the 27th year, the 27th attempt at trying to come together to find a solution for the climate crisis that we're all now facing. And we had 636 oil lobbyists that were actually inside COP, and it was held in Egypt, a country that's renowned for its repression against freedom of speech and protest. So on one hand, you've got 636 oil lobbyists, and then you've got the prisons heaving with peaceful protesters. So it was a complete whitewash, and they didn't even mention fossil fuels. So yeah, it just shows. The one thing COP did fantastically was it showed all nations that they cannot count on their governments to help solve them through this crisis.
And I don't think even the BBC managed to sell this as a success of any kind. I think everybody is quite obvious that this doesn't really work. We did hear, though, in the run up to this and afterwards, that the British government is very proud of being a self-declared world leader in tackling climate change and reducing CO2 emissions. What do you think about this claim?
Well, again, it's just massive lies, isn't it? It's a complete whitewash. We claim that we're world leaders and say that we account for 1% of emissions, but we don't include transportation, aviation, imported goods, and the military in those figures. So once again, we're just extolling false virtues and we're greenwashing and lying.
Can you describe then concretely what your campaign is fighting for? What are your key targets?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a single issue group. We just want the government to say no to new oil and gas licensing. Currently, they're planning to have over 100 new licensing, and we are just trying to stop that. Also, the government every week spends 236 million in taxpayer money that goes to the fossil fuel industry. And we have people dying in their homes and families that are struggling between heating and eating. And not only do we not tax these industries that are making multi-billions every few months, we're actually giving them money to do that. And
I presume instead you're arguing for the development of other natural sources of energy, or where it's coming from then?
Yeah, well, we are asking for homes to be insulated instead of that 236 million weekly. We're saying that should go into insulation, basic free sort of energy for people that need it, and better transportation.
Something we can all agree on. Let's talk about the stuff then, perhaps where some of the controversies are coming up. For example, Just Stop Oil UK did an action last week, I believe it was, slow walking across the road, and again, every media outlet is covering it, so you're totally getting there in terms of getting into the news. But I understand you also walked through Islington, which is quite a left-wing borough. It's the borough where Jeremy Corbyn has been elected. And you got, that's how the media reports. You also get quite a lot of hostility from people who want to get to work, who want to, get to the doctors, etc. How do you experience those kind of tensions, perhaps?
Well, again, the media only show the negative side. And they repeat all the time that we are stopping people going about their day-to-day lives. And what will the climate crisis do? People will not be able to go about their day-to-day lives in the climate crisis. When we get an option to go on to a programme to discuss this, they mostly want to talk about a hypothetical ambulance being held up. They don't care that 100,000 people are dying every year in the UK because of air pollution. But actually, I would say the majority of the comments on the stream are quite supportive, and some are very supportive. But the media only hone in on the negative ones.
I mean, how do you see the relationship of your campaign to, say, more traditional, working class political parties, the Labour Party or other left-wing parties, trade unions? Are you trying to win them over, work with them? Or where do you see the relationship between campaigns like yours, which is mainly dominated by young people, whereas the old left is often quite old?
Well, but actually, Just Stop Oil are not mainly young people. We have a really wide demographic. I think it's mainly the younger people are getting in the media more. We are filled with grandparents, the same as Extinction Rebellion, grandparents that are just trying to fight for their grandchildren's future. But we are making really good strides in working with trade unions. Recently, we were supporting at Forley with oil strikers, because it's really important. They go hand in hand, but we don't actually have a political party that is for the workers anymore, do we? I mean, we have Starmer that is telling MPs they can't go and support on the picket lines, which is just insane, because we all need to work together really now. This is the time to get together and to help. Yeah.
In terms of then, I think you're also a supporter of Extinction Rebellion, and Just Oil UK is kind of linked to that. And the target, or they've relaunched a project called the Project 3.5, which is quite an interesting one, because it is, I understand, the sort of the key strategy of the campaign, which is that you don't have to win over the majority of the population. You just have to win over 3.5% of the population to make a change. For me as a socialist, that sort of is a bit of a tricky one, because I'm in favor of a majority revolution, etc. Where do you see their attention? Well, I can see it, but do you see that? How is that? How you're going to make that change if you don't have the majority of people behind you?
Well, when they were forming Extinction Rebellion, they looked at past movements like the civil rights movement, the suffragette movement, movements that were morally just. And they saw that it was about 3 or 5% of the population that were actively getting involved in civil resistance. And then that was enough of a carrot, say, versus a stick to get people to join in. So the 3.5 movement are trying to get 100,000 people, to go and march in Westminster in April. And I think it's a brilliant cause, and people should be getting behind it. And I think it could have really, really great a knock-on effect.
So who do you sort of aim your campaign at then with this 3.5%? You know, is it the government you're trying to get enough people out that they feel pressured, or do you want to win over, you know, parties like the Labour Party or others, or the government? Who do you think is going to make the necessary changes?
Well, it's clearly not the government. I mean, the science has been clear from the 70s, and successive governments have ignored it, and they've put profit over people time and time again. And the 27th COP has shown that. So the 3.5 is asking members of Extinction Rebellion to reach out to their community and to bring people along with them. So it's actually, it's supposed to be a movement of people rising up and showing the government that we actually want a livable future, and we don't want investment in oil because renewables are 9 times cheaper.
And the 3.5, is that the active? You want 3.5 to be active, or do you want to convince 3.5 of the population, the sort of the passive population? How does that work?
As far as I'm aware, it's active. We want it's to have the 3.5%, the people that really strongly care, to show your support and join in a mass mobilization. And
that they probably influence other people then, on the other hand.
Yeah, then definitely, then lots of people will see that and realize, hang on a minute, this makes complete sense. It makes sense for the planet, sense for your children, and it makes monetary sense because renewables are 9 times cheaper.
Very interesting. Jackie, do you have a question for Laura?
I'd like to know what's your relationship to the Green Party, because I would have expected you to have quite close links to the Green Party. Are there links? Do you have a relationship to them? What's the attitude between the two?
As far as I'm aware, we don't have any links. We are a sort of a non-political movement. We are just a single issue group that is demanding the halt to new oil and gas licensing. I mean, that's really all we are trying to do. As soon as the government say that they're not going to license any new oil and gas, Just Stop Oil will cease to be, because our job will be done. But that's not to say that individually people don't support the Green Party, because of course we all want a green, livable future.
Sort of maybe a final question then. I mean, you know, as a socialist, I could kind of understand you can achieve certain bits of change. You could perhaps pressurize the government into, perhaps putting all their eggs into renewable energy. But will that, I mean, there's then the task, is that going to stop the climate catastrophe internationally? Or, you know, do we actually need something bigger, a revolution in my, you know, of the mass of the population, in my view? You know, how do you see that link? Can you solve the climate catastrophe with, you know, can you prevent it within capitalism?
Quite probably no. But I mean, what personally, the thing that used to upset me for most of my life was that the world is run by corporations. But actually, when you look at that, that is also the get out clause. It's beautiful. You just stop buying their shit, and you can halt a lot of the profits, you know. But Just Stop Oil are just demanding no new oil and gas licensing in the UK. But what we need is a worldwide effect. We need people all across the world to be demanding the same from their government. We can only do what we can do in the UK.
Thank you very much, Laura. I hope you can stay with us for a little while longer, because we've got now our next speaker. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, I'm very interested in this issue of this way of organising resistance in terms of single issues. And I'm now going to be speaking to Chris Knight. Some of our audience no doubt will know Chris. Now, Chris hasn't been as involved in protest in the last 4 or 5 years, because he's been involved with writing what will be the most important book ever written on the development of language. And Chris, of course, is an anthropologist, but I think I'm right in saying you've also got experience of being involved in the protest movement. broad umbrella statement there, for the last 60 years. What's your opinion about this single issue movement as opposed to, is there a difference? Does it matter? Is it effective? How do you see that?
Just perhaps I should start by saying that I think the reason I haven't been in police cells recently is because I'm getting on a bit, Jackie. There's a limit to how much you can do. But no, I agree with absolutely every word that Laura said. And every time I'm either with, obviously I've right from the beginning, I've been sitting in the road with Extinction Rebellion. But when I hear, I don't know, critics from various political parties that think revolution is the answer, I just think, well, who's actually doing most to start a revolution on this issue? The people like Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion who are actually taking direct action, or people who say, no, it'd be better to have a world revolution. I just feel, to me, you get a little step towards revolution when you start taking direct action on an absolutely critical issue. And so I just don't feel like criticizing at all. I just think it's not my place. The people who can criticize are people who are doing more to get some action underway and to raise attention across the entire population of the world as to what actually is happening to our planet, which is, I mean, it is just beyond catastrophic what's happening at the moment. So I just say hats off to Laura and everyone else. I'm not going to criticize.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see there's a problem there with whatever strategy is used. But I mean, on the left, I hear some of the criticism coming is that somehow, single issue protests and direct action don't really have a root, its roots within Marxist theory, Marxist praxis. What would you say about that, Chris?
Well, I don't know. It's even when it comes to Marxism, it's completely absurd to make those points, because Marx, more than anyone else, made it absolutely clear that the primacy of practice. He pointed out that people can't learn anything unless they're beginning to organize and become empowered. Practice is the primary thing. And what is a strike but direct action? I mean, until ordinary people are feeling their own strength, feeling their own connections, feeling their own power, they're not going to feel the need for, if you like, revolutionary ideas or ideas about how to deal with the climate catastrophe. The first thing to do is to start getting active, then you find yourself beginning to make links. And if people think that, I don't know, Just Stop Oil is too much of a single issue campaign, well, give support from wherever you are, whatever union you're involved in or other campaign you're involved in, give support to Just Stop Oil. Assume, as you've every right to assume, that Just Stop Oil will reciprocate that support and start making connections. But just wagging your finger and say, oh, you shouldn't be a single issue campaign is ridiculous. Everyone starts with some particular issue which they feel most strongly about. And I can't think of any issue more absolutely critical. And I remember only 10 or 15 years ago, people sort of saying, well, these green issues, they're all long-term. We're interested in the immediate interests of the working class. I cannot think of any more immediate interest than keeping alive and having a planet for our children to live in. It's an immediate issue. Long last, I think everyone can pretty much anyone who's got a brain in their head can see that it's a desperately critical issue, and it should be top of the list. I mean, having a planet to live in, I would have thought that's pretty important, pretty much above all the other issues, except, of course, as Laura just said, they're all connected up anyway. They're all connected up. And it probably is true, and in fact, I'm sure it's true, that we're not going to solve the problems without a revolution. But the thing to do is not to prattle on about revolution. We need a revolution. It's to stop organizing in a revolutionary way.
Why do you think single issue protest has developed in the way that, it's not totally new, is it? Because in a way, the suffragettes were a single issue movement. But why has this happened so much recently?
Not quite sure what the question there is. When you say single issue, I can't quite get that. I don't know why the climate is a single issue.
No, I'm not just talking about the climate. For example, we've got somebody from, we've got Huda from Palestine Action coming on soon. And I think there are many campaigns who see themselves as going, we're not going to be concerned with too much. we're going to be concerned with.
Well, okay. Well, I mean, I just think that Just Stop Oil is an absolute object lesson to all of us. Having a long, complicated message with a great long manifesto with all kinds of I's dotted and T's crossed, and say this is the thought you have to have in your head. It's go through, read our manifesto. No, one simple message: just stop oil. That is just so effective. It doesn't mean you can't put other messages like Free Palestine or other things critically part of the struggle, but to have one single message, a very simple message: just stop oil. It's a lesson in how to get a message across. It's just brilliant.
I mean, nobody, none of us are disagreeing with, that it's important to have single issue campaigns on various issues and stunts. I think in your time, you've done some great stunts on the royal wedding, etc., which got you in the newspapers, etc., which is brilliant. It brings the message home, doesn't it? We want to speak to as many people as possible. But I do want to talk to you a little bit about Marx, because he didn't just say, be active and do this and do that. I mean, he spent a lot of time developing programs, the program you just sort of dismissed a little bit. And, the Communist Manifesto is a program for the working class. He was involved in various organizations. He helped to found working class political parties, because he understood that we need to get the working class together in a political party to challenge the state and to challenge capitalism. I mean, that's not unimportant, though, is it? You do consider yourself a Marxist, don't you? We have to link the two, surely. We have to do both.
Well, I sometimes wonder, Marx said, if these people are Marxists, don't call me a Marxist. And I sometimes wonder myself. I would
call you a Marxist, Chris.
Yes, I know. I do identify intellectually as a Marxist. But for me, being a Marxist means putting, where it comes to thinking, ideas, things in the head, as opposed to just, if you like, just practice, it means putting science first. Put science first, in my view. That's what Marx was trying to do. Just because you're a Marxist, that doesn't mean your ideology is kind of scientific. And I don't believe the whole idea of scientific socialism and all that stuff, it ends up with certain people thinking that they have a right to teach others how to think. And so this whole idea of sort of Marxist education, somehow various people, various intellectuals, various professors, or whoever they are, need to kind of educate the working class. Marx made a brilliant point. He said, what is it? What was the exact words he said? Who is to educate the educators? And he pointed out that education, if you like Marxist education or any other revolutionary education, it has to be self-education. Don't expect somebody to be entitled to start teaching you how to think. So self-education means you start to, first of all, you have to organize. There has to be some practice. Everything that Marx did was in the context of the revolutionary situations breaking out in 1848, the Paris Commune. Obviously, now and again, you get a turn down of the struggle, and you're not much you can do except maybe write a program or try to write a huge big tome, a critique of political anthropology. But the essence of Marxism is to turn upside down the usual idea, which is that the workers need educating, and of course, nearly all the sort of current brands of Marxism that the various sects disseminate are versions of that idea, that somehow we are the Communist Party, we are the Socialist Workers' Party, we are this or that, and we are the people who need to educate the class how to think. And it's just completely upside down. That's the opposite of what Marx and Engels thought. And just by the way, because we're connected here with Labour Briefing from the outset took the exact opposite position. We said information is power. The London Labour Briefing, it was reporting the news and making it. And the kind of information we had was never finger wagging. It was connect up initially across London. What actions are being taken? What moves are being taken to kick out the right wing of the local Labour parties, councillors, and so on. But the information has to be empowering information, so that as we become empowered, we become aware of that. And just now, as we're speaking, with the greatest, most extraordinary coincidence of different strike waves all over the country, never mind other parts of the world, The critical thing now is to be aware of how strong we're becoming, aware of each other's struggles, aware of each other connections we're all making, and join up the struggles, including, of course, the struggles, so-called single issue campaigns like Just Stop Oil. But this is an extraordinary moment we're entering in the next week or so around Christmas, and probably throughout the spring. Incredible amount of action, direct action being taken by trade unionists. And of course, we need to link them up. That's the critical thing. That's what Marx and Engels were constantly attempting to do, to link up the struggles.
I think one thing that strikes me is that in these kind of different models, I mean, I think it's a false bifurcation, actually, of action in any case, is that one sort of model, to some extent, really has people in this organized system where if you protest, you go on a march or you have a strike and you organize like that. And the other model, for me, seems to be one which is much more about actually activating people to act for what they believe and what they're trying to change. And that seems to me to be something of the difference.
What I think is that you should never feel that it's your job to teach people what to think. When ordinary people start to get organized, when they discover their connections, where they discover their own power to make changes, then they will be receptive to, if you like, revolutionary ideas. But when people are weak and unorganized, then they will kind of feel the need for the ideas of their weakness. They'll feel a need for racism. They'll feel a need for sexism, patriarchy, or just a reaction. May feel a need to read The Sun or the Daily Mail or some wretched gutter newspaper. But so it's only when people are starting to experience their own strength that they become receptive to the ideas which express that strength. And my own view is that once people start to get organized, we can leave. They'll find the right ideas once they're aware of their own strength. They'll find ideas appropriate, and we shouldn't have to tell them what particular program or thought to have in their heads. The critical thing is to organize.
You know, Chris,
but of course, they have to be available.
Yeah.
The revolutionary ideas when those upheavals occur. Of course, when people thirst for revolutionary ideas, it's rather a good idea to make sure they're available. Of course, it is.
No, Chris, can I just ask Chris something on that? I've studied your book, for example, as part of an education program on the human revolution, which I thought was extremely enlightening, and the way you've explained that. We've lived together in the past. The majority of humanity since its existence has lived together in a very egalitarian way, in a socialistic way, if you will. And, you know, that helped me as a person, as an individual, to look forward to something, a better way of living that could be, you know, that we can learn from the past. And without that aim of where we're going, I think there's a danger that campaigns can fizzle out. I mean, strikes have happened, you know, always we go on demonstration, even those can happen. But I think there is an issue if we as Marxists don't actually spell out what we're fighting for, what kind of society we're trying to achieve. And to be honest, you know, I found great inspiration from your book and from that idea that we can live in a different way. And what's wrong with saying that to people, that, you know, automatically we won't overcome racism, etc. We actually have to struggle consciously for what I call socialism, call it communism, whatever. But without that, I think that is a problem if we don't say that.
Well, I have tried to say it, but I wouldn't start wagging my finger at some picket line telling them they need to learn about the human revolution. I mean, it's there will come a time, hopefully, when people will realize and want to know all about the revolution which made us human. I mean, that's the point is that we are a species with language and culture and kinship and all the things which define us as human beings. All that happened not just through Darwinian gradualist revolution, but through a process of evolution which culminated in a revolution, and archaeologists call it the human revolution. And in that revolution, something extraordinary happened. The world was turned upside down. Women gained an enormous amount of solidarity. And as you know, my argument is that all culture, kinship, morality, language, and everything was born on the picket line. And because of that, I've always thought that whenever you have a picket line, we should fill out that picket line with the music, with the singing, with all the things which make us human, and with the laughter, with all the things which go beyond just standing on a picket line and demanding whatever it is that your demands are. So, Tina, I'm glad you read the book. It's great. I'm not quite sure what point you're making. I mean, yes, in my view, I mean, I'm not a climate scientist, but I'm sort of in the same kind of field at University College London, in the sense that my specialist scientific field is human origins. You can't know about human origins without knowing all about different, immense climate changes which accompany the evolution of our lineage of hominins. So yes, that's why I'm a scientist. That's because I think science is the most revolutionary form of knowledge there is. And in particular these days, climate science is absolutely critical. And what has been astonishing and very, very disheartening has been the way in which scientists have been left without a voice. They've been completely inarticulate. All these scientists have known for 40 years about the catastrophe we're heading for, and they've been completely tongue-tied. And so really quite recently, obviously James Hansen and others have been trying to do their best to warn of the thing of what's around the corner, but it's taken Extinction Rebellion and others, of course, to sort of make scientists feel that they dare come out and say what they've known for so long. So again, that's another way of putting it. I mean, you can't be a Marxist, in my view, not a Marxist in the sense that Marx and Engels meant, without putting science first. And there's no earthly reason why ordinary people shouldn't be part of the scientific community. It's not, obviously some of the technicalities are a bit complex, but I mean, any person with a brain can work out roughly what the scientists are telling us, both about the climate, but also about how we became human, which is a critically important point, and of course why I'm an anthropologist.
Chris, thank you. Can you stay with us, because I think we're going to head towards an interesting discussion. Tina.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. We're very pleased to have with us now Matthew Huber, who is a professor and who's written a couple of books on the issue that we'll be discussing. One of them is Climate Change as Class War, and the other one was Lifeblood, Oil, Freedom, and the Forces of Capital. Thanks for joining us, Matthew. Listening to the discussion so far, you're a bit of an expert on these campaigns as well. How do you view campaigns like Extinction Rebellion and sort of limiting their demands to just something quite concrete and small in that sense?
Well, first, I want to sort of say that I agree that this work is crucial, and the urgency is so intense that it makes sense to organize in this way. But to me, the environmental movement for many decades really has been quite comfortable with campaigns that are focused on stopping stuff or blocking stuff. And, Naomi Klein talked about Blockadia, the sort of movement sort of against pipelines and infrastructure. And obviously Just Stop Oil is in that vein, right? And clearly we need to stop fossil fuel infrastructure and production, and that's urgent. But I think we could also pivot towards movements that are also calling for what we also need to address climate, which is massive production and building of infrastructure, a totally new energy system. We know we need to build new transport systems, new electricity systems. We need to, if not build new green housing, we need to retrofit existing housing, which I just heard that Just Stop Oil is calling for, huge insulation campaigns and free transport, which is all great. But I actually think if we focus more on the building part of the project, which is necessary to address climate change, there's a lot of advantages to that. It's going to be oriented around lots of things that would be seen as benefits to the larger population, like jobs, for instance, but also traditionally, this kind of Blockadia style, just like blocking stuff, environmentalism has come at loggerheads with trade unions because they see it as a threat to their jobs and their livelihoods. But this politics of building, which is necessary to solve climate change, is going to have obvious appeal to trading unions and the building trades and other key sectors of the industrial economy that we actually have to transform. And these trade unions, as you're seeing in the UK with their strikes, and they still have tremendous power despite being attacked for the last several decades. They have members and resources and structural power just by virtue of being the people that do the work in these systems and can withdraw their labor and cause a crisis. So that this kind of more positive politics of not just saying we want to stop stuff, we want to actually build a new society, I think just has more potential to kind of generate more appeal. I have more thoughts on just direct action in general, but maybe I'll stop there. But
let's hear it. I think I actually want to speak on that.
So I think direct action is, as many of the speakers were saying, has been crucial to all forms of social movements throughout history. But I think we need to think about direct action in a strategic way and make sure that if the direct action is actually generating kind of mass sympathy and mass kind of support, that's the kind of direct action that actually has political power. And obviously, I think Chris pointed out the most powerful form of direct action that we've seen is labor strikes, right? Just the threat of a rail strike in this country I'm in, the United States, has sent the most powerful people in my country scrambling to try to prevent it, right? A few years ago, West Virginia teachers shut down schools through a teacher strike and won their demands within 2 weeks in a right-wing Republican state. So workers have power that, we saw the wave of student strikes for climate and all this stuff, but unfortunately, these students don't have the same structural power as workers do in these systems, that when they go on strike, they actually shut systems down and if they do it in the private sector, they shut down the source of capital's profits and all this stuff. In socialist circles in the United States, there's been this pamphlet that's been really influential, and it's called Liberalism, Ultra-Leftism, and Mass Action. And it tries to make an argument that our politics has to be oriented toward mass action that really generates sort of popular support and popular sympathy through sets of actions. And they actually do talk about the civil rights movement as being an example of direct actions that actually were able to harness the sort of popular support. And when they analyze something they call ultra-leftism, they say it often tends toward this sort of feeling that we just need to do action for action's sake or practice for practice's sake without thinking strategically about whether or not this action will actually generate the kind of mass movement of the masses, which I think a socialist should agree that really, to generate transformative change, it might be that you need like an active 3.5%, but generally you need sort of mass popular engagement and support for your demands if you're going to actually achieve a big shift, a big change in the balance of power. And so really, I think unfortunately, I think a lot of the actions and direct actions that have been undertaken by Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil have been more along the lines of action for action's sake. And it's pretty clear to me that they're not generating this kind of huge outpourings of popular support for these actions. And in fact, we know the classic cases of Extinction Rebellion doing actions that actually create pretty significant backlash amongst masses of people, particularly in the working class. I'll just close by one quick thing that, I think Chris said that there's nothing more immediate than the survival of our planet. And that's true in a very kind of scientific and visceral sense. And it's true for our grandchildren. But I think we need to understand that under capitalism, the real disaster for people to survive, it's just everyday struggles to survive in the market and to make ends meet. And, there's a reason why the Yellow Vest movement in France, they talked about politicians only care about the end of the world and we're trying to get to the end of the month. And there's been this sort of incapacity for climate and environmental movements to really meet the working class in these end of month struggles. The fact people are, especially now with the cost of living crisis, are basically can't survive. They're deciding whether to pay a heating bill or rent. And these end of month struggles are unfortunately much more immediate than the health of the habitability of the planet, as much as we all understand that that's crucial to everything and to our children and everything else. But for most working class people, it feels distant. And so, but fortunately, there's, huge overlap between these end of month struggles like housing and electricity and food. All these things overlap with the very sectors that we need to transform. And again, I would advocate a politics that talks about how we transform those sectors through a politics of building a new future, as opposed to just stop stuff, just block stuff, and that kind of politics. So I've rambled enough. Sorry.
No, I think that was really, really interesting. Actually, I think it would be good if we bring in Laura now, actually, to respond quickly. Because Laura, I mean, this is something I was hinting at when we talked earlier, that a lot of working class people who want to go, they need to go to work. They don't get paid if they don't show up at work, etc. And you're blocking them, and instead of sort of winning them over, you might piss them off seriously. Can you see that as a potential problem?
Well, absolutely. Thank you. I'm glad you brought me in, because I was making lots of notes. So yeah, I really respect your opinion, Matt. But when you said that we are action for action's sake, you might not be aware that we have tried everything. We have gone and stopped oil depots. We have targeted the more rich elite companies, and we don't get any media attention. Back in April, Extinction Rebellion closed down the headquarters of Barclays for the whole day. No media attention. No one was arrested. We do these things to get attention. And did you think the suffragettes and the civil rights movement were action for action's sake? Exactly. So we are desperately trying to get the media to pay attention, and for people to pay attention. This is the most existential crisis that humanity has ever faced, and we have to deal with it now. And also, what you say, and Tina, your point is very valid, that when people are struggling to pay bills, they don't have the time to deal with the crisis. But the cost of living crisis and the climate crisis are two sides of the same coin. If we had insulated our homes, 15, 20 years ago, we wouldn't be in this problem now. If we transitioned to renewables, which are 9 times cheaper, we wouldn't be in this issue.
Thank you. That wasn't planned bringing you in, but I thought it was worth having your view quickly. We want to talk to Huda Amori quickly, and please stay on. Huda Amori is from Palestine Action, and you're very direct action, and you've been very successful in targeting Elbit, the Israeli weapons factory. Have you thought, when you developed these ideas about what you're going to target and how you're going to, talk about the plight of the Palestinians, was the kind of issues we're discussing here today, was that on your mind, that you are, trying to hit them where it hurts, but perhaps not hurt the workers as such?
So when we started Palestine Action, our aim was directly to shut Elbit down, which is Israel's largest arms company, and for us, the background to it was we're in a country, Britain, who basically, with the Balfour Declaration, signed over the land of Palestine to the Zionist forces and has been part of colonizing Palestine ever since. And we've seen that with every successive government since 1917, and myself and many others, as people have with the climate movement, had tried, every possible route. But when it comes to Palestine, when you're trying to appeal to the oppressors, which the British state are part of the oppressive force oppressing the Palestinians, then it comes to a point when you realize that it's pointless. And for us, our goal was to shut Elbit down, this company which is building these weapons which are tested. They market them as tested on Palestinians, and they build them here in Britain and send them to kill people across the world. So for us, we didn't consider other tactics such as blocking roads, etc., because we knew we wanted to shut this company down So we took direct action, which in our eyes is about going straight to the source of the issue. So if we want to shut Albert down permanently, then we would do that through our actions. So every action is geared towards either blockading the gates, climbing onto the roof of these factories, going inside and smashing their weapons inside so they can't be used to kill people. So of course for us it made that was our I think our initial thoughts was to go straight to these Albert sites, and that's what we did. And I just wanted to pick up on another point that I think direct action and civil disobedience is often mixed up as one, and I think it's different strategies. So for us, every time we shut Albert down, it's about envisaging the future you want to see. And so if we want Albert to be shut down, we shut them down. And that means that through every action we do, you have a direct success. For us, arrests aren't the aim, it's a consequence that we're more than willing to take in order to shut these arms factories down. So every time an action takes place, it's a success within itself, because every minute, every day they can't make these weapons is a success and disrupts the war machine. So whereas civil disobedience might be being disobedient to the law in general in order to pressure the government to comply with those demands. But for us, it was about bypassing the government altogether and being able to kick out these companies, because we are fully aware of how complicit this government is. And that for us, the most successful strategy we believe in is go directly to the source of these companies, but also targeting their landlords and secondary targets as well, to build that pressure to kick Albert out of this country.
I mean, it's great. Of course, you are very successful, as you say. It makes it a very successful campaign. But the kind of issue then is, don't they go somewhere else? Don't they go get their weapons from another company? How do you engage with that then, with that problem?
Well, I think that's an argument you can say for anything, right? You campaign against anything when it can be done through another way. But for us, it's more about, first of all, it would be a strategic, a logistical nightmare for them to be kicked out of Britain, where they are making these weapons and massively disrupts their war machine. And the reason that they're in Britain in the first place, because they use Palestine as a laboratory, and they want to expand the weapons they develop on Palestinians to other countries. And Britain, as I mentioned before, is a key strategic ally for Israel. So not only is it a practical nightmare for them to not be able to function here, but it's the political embarrassment of not being able to function in a country which you deem one of your strongest allies, and to be able to, force them out of this country, not by the government, but by the people, will send ripple effects across the world and sends a political message across the world as well, that people will not stand for this and that we will not allow them to expand their weapons and the development on Palestinians to this country.
Jackie, did you want to ask something?
That's what's happened, Huda, and I mean, this joins it up. And I'd like to invite Chris in at this point as well to join, because I think he did have his hand up and wanted to contribute something. But when you do this, obviously, workers lose their jobs, don't they? I mean, it's not a direct aim, but it is something that happens. Now, what I'm doing is relating this, in fact, to the previous conversation about how we actually get people on our sides. And I'm also unsure about this proposal that the reason why the civil rights movement or the suffragette movement won is that we won people on our sides. I mean, I would suggest that one of the reasons that the civil rights movement worked is that many states became pretty ungovernable, given what the protests that were going on, which also included stopping people coming to work. But Chris, you had a comment you wanted to make as well.
Yes, well, I mean, again, you put your finger on it, Jackie, as well. The connection between Laura and Huda's two apparently different direct action campaigns. As Huda said, you want a future without arms factories? Well, close this one down. I mean, in other words, be the change you want to see in the world. Start the way you mean to go on. Do something which is actually part of the solution. And it's the same when you stop huge lots of cars on the M25 or going across the Dartford Bridge. In a sense, because we don't need all those cars, there should be free public transport. Of course, Jackie, you put it yourself. It's gonna inconvenience workers. Well, of course, it inconvenienced workers in Brighton on this wretched arms company when their firms shut down. I mean, okay, so what? I mean, you're not going to start with everyone, all workers across the world, all having absolutely identical immediate interests. Of course not. Of course not. So I'm just saying that, there's a very interesting parallel there between these two apparently single issue campaigns, which clearly connect up. I was looking at Laura's face as you were speaking, Huda, and I could just see that Laura was 100% in solidarity with you. I mean, am I right, Laura? I can see again from your face that you are. So I mean, I just don't think it's very sensible for kind of people like ourselves that tend to be activists and maybe think of ourselves as intellectuals or some damn thing to be kind of going around criticizing each other too much. I mean, I will just say one thing, I suppose. I'll say this, that I have always felt, and I'm addressing Laura now. I've always felt, ever since I was first involved in Extinction Rebellion, that it would be quite clever if you're going to stop a bridge or something, to kind of work to a rhythm. And for me, because I think that we're a strange planet with the reason we've got life on Earth is because of one planet hitting another. We've got a huge moon right close to us. The whole of life on Earth has been a sort of Earth, Sun, Moon system. I've always thought that any genuine environmentalist would get back to some kind of slow time and use the moon as a clock as well as the sun as a clock. I know this will sound incredibly strange to people, because we all assume that the clocks that capitalism has given us, are kind of the clocks we're going to need in the future. But I'll just say this: I think it would be quite clever to have instead of sort of subjecting motorists to completely sort of unpredictable random stoppages, to make people aware that once a month, maybe dark moon or something like that, some natural clock. Just don't even think of taking your car out, because there are going to be street parties on every street, across every bridge, and just make this stopping of cars, getting people to do some other way of travelling, hopefully getting towards free public transport. Make that something which we're actually doing in the course of our protests, so that it becomes a kind of regular rhythm and becomes again, like we start the way we mean to go on. We would like a future where we take time off, where we enjoy time off from all these wretched, wage slavery forms that we're subject to at the moment. And one way to do it would be to have a regular rhythm of stoppages.
I mean, our program Redline TV is we're trying to critically examine particular issues. That's why we, invite debate, and perhaps sometimes we disagree with each other on something. I don't think it's a particular problem. I think that's how comrades learn, and that's how we learn, listening to different arguments, because the fight for a better society is a very complicated fight. So it's, I don't think it's a problem with us critiquing each other's view a little bit. Hilda, you have your hand up.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add a point where I think sometimes these issues, obviously there's massive links between all of these issues, right? And that's important to recognize. But, picking up on before about single issue campaigns, I think the reason why we're seeing more of it now is because, we want to win, right? And for us to focus on shutting Elba down in this country, who had 10 sites, they're now down to 8, and have lost £280 million in contracts recently. For us, that's a very achievable aim. For us to just say free Palestine, which obviously I want a free Palestine, there has to be blocks that we work to before that, because you need that, you need that motivation within the movement to keep going and to understand that people can be empowered through that movement. And I think that's why direct action is very empowering, especially when you see the world as the way it is today. There are, on a kind of opposite side of things, we see companies like Elbit try and create weapons that are now, carbon neutral, because the British Army wants to be carbon neutral by 2050, which I mean is way too late anyway. But then, you're getting companies like Elbit in on that. And this is where things are going. And obviously that's not down to any group's fault or anything like that. It's more about the fact that, the capitalist world that we live in and how they see it. So I do think there has to be a level of anti-colonialism embedded in the movements that we are part of. Because we don't want to, we want to work towards worlds where we're not destroying our planet. But, for people in Palestine or for people in Iraq, often they can't think about the next 50 years because they don't know if they're going to have a home or if they'll be alive in the next year. So these issues are interlinked, and we can't, we have to make sure that we are, I believe, including those kind of anti-colonialist language or practices within our movement and making that clear that that's not acceptable. And that is part of being against the capitalism as well, and imperialism.
And this greenwashing of capitalism is an interesting subject. I think, Matthew, you've worked a little bit on that as well. A carbon neutral bomb to wipe out Palestinian villages. I mean, that is a more extreme version of it. But when you were sort of listening to the discussion, and what Chris in particularly was saying, the be the change yourself. If you try hard enough, and if we all do it, can that really challenge or prevent climate catastrophe if we all just try harder?
Well, if I can, unfortunately, I think a lot of times this discussion is just purely in moral terms, and without a doubt, these activists who are doing Just Stop Oil, direct action, they are in the moral right. They're on the side of history that we need to do to save this planet. But unfortunately, I think we need to not just talk about morality. We need to think about strategy and how we, as Huda was saying, how we actually win. And to me, if we're thinking strategically, we have to understand that I don't think, with all due respect, Laura, that the goal is to attract media attention. I think the goal is to actually attract mass popular support for your program and your politics. And I'm not sure, despite the media attention, I'm not sure the actions are translating to that kind of mass support. Even though they're getting a lot of attention or coverage, the civil rights movement was organized. A lot of it was actually organized by trade unionists, and the March on Washington, which involved hundreds of thousands of people converging for a mass action, was called a March for Jobs and Freedom. It had these popular demands, and their direct actions, translated to a kind of violence of the Jim Crow South that really captured the support of masses around the country. And I think I also wanted to really highlight strategically what Huda was saying, which the goal with direct action should be to create a practical nightmare for people in power, right? And I think that's what your actions are doing, right? You're actually making it difficult for these weapons people to actually conduct their horrific imperial business. And that's the type of action that strategically will lead to results. When you create a practical nightmare for people in power, they have to respond to your demands. And it's, like I said before, like shutting down school systems creates a practical nightmare for those in power. They have to come up with a response. And so thinking strategically about direct actions that don't just create a practical nightmare for working people trying to get to work, create a practical nightmare for the elites and the people in power who are actually, run society and need to be pushed to actually do anything to respond to our demands. That's where I think we should focus.
I have to say, Chris, that I find your idea of actually letting people know when this would happen quite good, because that is a way that actually you might build up solidarity from the very people who are actually being, having to use the roads at that time. But I noticed you had your hand up, Chris. What did you want to say?
Well, a few things. Yes, I really do think we're all on this much together. And of course, I totally agree with Matt about the need for strategy. And in fact, we've in Labour briefing over the years, we've I think shown that the kind of strategies that we use were actually pretty effective. But I was okay. So yes, on that point, Jackie. The way we've been putting it in the radical anthropology group and our various sort of indigenous rights activists around Amazon and other parts of the world is to talk about decolonizing time. And it's a very unfamiliar concept to talk about decolonizing time, but it is necessary to remember that, I mean, Marx said it in Das Kapital, of course, that the final analysis, economics boils down to the economics of time. Time is the ultimate resource. Time to be alive, time to do different things, and of course, these days, nearly all our time is taken up by by trying to keep a roof above our head and try to make enough money to make a living. But when we talk about decolonizing time, we mean just not taking for granted the kinds of clocks that capitalism has introduced for us. And I know this sounds a little bit strange in the West, but to indigenous people, it doesn't seem strange at all. And decolonizing time would mean, among other things, getting back to the kind of time that we humans evolved with. So we've evolved with the sun, the moon, day and night, the summer and winter, those kinds of time, which are part of our nature, if you like, because these are the clocks that our bodies are familiar with. So yes, Jackie, I do think it would be intelligent, actually, and maybe Laura can sort of pass this on to whoever may be interested in this. It would be quite intelligent to use these natural clocks, including the moon as well as the sun, to sort of warn motorists that it would not be a very good idea to take out your private car to try to cross the Dartford Bridge at a time when the moon's come down to Earth, which it does for 3 nights every month. Now, and that's just a kind of comical example. But I mean, as long as you had some portion of time which is capitalism free and road free and car free, and it was kind of known in advance, but instead of it just being a protest, what we'd be doing, we'd be strategically creating part of the future we'd like to see. Because in the future, we don't want all our time taken up with wage slavery. We don't want capitalism to be monopolizing all of our time, denying us our feast days, our Sundays, our holidays, 24/7 work in order to try to make a living, or completely out of work. It'd be far better if instead of having a system of some people working far too much and other people unemployed, we would actually parcel up time in a different way, with all of us out of work because we're having a damn good time, period of rest and carnival and thinking about the meaning of life kind of thing, as well as having a laugh, and then shorten the amount of time we spend on capitalism, obviously, hopefully reducing it more and more. But I mean, that would mean that the stopping the cars would actually be a positive contribution to the world we want to see, instead of just a protest. But for that, I would kind of agree with some of the other points made, which is that would mean going way beyond the idea that we need to win over 3.5% of people. I know that's just a start. I completely understand the logic there, but it would mean, it would increasingly mean that the whole community would start feeling this is a good way to live. To start getting in touch with these basic rhythms that we've evolved with, and which are part of the way nature works, and one of the reasons why we even exist as a species.
I think Laura has.
And I want to say one more thing. Sorry, just one more very briefly. Just Matt. I mean, I was glad, Matt, that you talked about an overlap, because when you sort of said, the green jackets people in France were saying, oh, you're worried about the end of the world. We're worried about the end of the month. So I mean, of course you're right there. But I mean, tell the people in Pakistan at the moment, tell the people in Somalia at the moment, tell people in the huge parts of the world that climate change isn't an immediate thing when they're actually being flooded out of their homes. It is absolutely immediate, but increasingly that kind of immediate interest, that kind of immediate concern, that being washed out of your village, or having a huge landslide, or a terrible drought as we're getting in Somalia and other places, that kind of immediacy is now, as you put it, Matt, yourself, is beginning to overlap with other kinds of immediacy, like not being able to make it to the end of the month because you haven't got enough money. So those two kind of versions of immediacy are overlapping now, and I'm glad you made that point, because it's.
I think if we're socialists, we're also internationalists. So we're we care about what's happening in Bangladesh and in those other countries, and what we shouldn't be doing is, say, prioritizing our workers. But Laura, who's had obviously problems with her computer, has just come online, and I know you've been waving your hand. Laura, what did you want to say?
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to be waving my hand. I think I was just trying to get the angle right. I will just very quickly say I really agree with what Chris was saying, and that was an Extinction Rebellion strategy, to have some party with it and frivolity, and to let the police know where we are. We can't do that with Just Stop Oil. We're already facing very harsh sentencing. We get GPS tagged. I'm currently GPS tagged. I'm banned from areas of London. If Just Stop Oil told the police where we'd be, there would be no protest.
Can I just say, I think that's a really good point, because what we have now is draconian government response to protest. And as that happens, strangely, or perhaps not strangely, the reaction against it in terms of what the demonstrators do has to become, one presumes, harsher. Huda, you've had quite some experience in terms of response with police and the court systems, haven't you? But it's worked differently for Palestine Action.
Yeah, so we have had a strong response from the police and the state, as you'd probably expect, at the start of Palestine Action. I mean, to this day, it's very regular for people's homes to be raided. Myself and another co-founder, Richard Barnard, had our passports stolen by the police and many other, and stopped by counter-terrorism police and asked about all of my family's names in Iraq, etc., for several hours, and other measures taken. And I've also been charged with blackmail, which I just think is a joke, which is basically, apparently asking for a demand and doing direct action to make it happen amounts to blackmail. But that's just any decent protest group has a demand. That's how these things work. But what we've seen is that actually when we've gone to the courts, and that kind of end of this process, right? Like, the police can do whatever they like, basically, while you're charged or before you're charged. When we've gone to the courts, we've been massively successful, and that has a lot to do with the company that we are fighting against. We had our first Crown Court trial just a week ago, and activists were found not guilty unanimously within an hour by the jury. And I think it's a very easy argument to make. I'd like to think that most people wouldn't be on the side of an arms manufacturer, versus when it comes down to the courts and to juries. But what we've seen is a massive delay in the vast majority of our cases. And Elbit, prior to Palestine Action, actually, there was sporadic action against Elbit. No one ever went to court. And this has a lot to do with disclosure requests. The company does not want to be in court. They don't want to face scrutiny, which happens when you are charged. You can demand things like disclosure from the company to aid your defense. And Elbit have always avoided that. So for us, it's actually a challenge to Elbit by us entering the courts and fighting our cases. And so, it has been successful for us so far, but, you can't, when you do direct action, you can, you're directly affecting the company. You can kind of control the outcome of your action. Obviously, when you enter the court system, when you do this type of action, you take on a personal risk on yourself. And when you enter the court system, there is no guarantee that you'll be found not guilty. Everyone is risking their own liberty, has already risked their own liberty. But I think that, especially when we talk about things like a revolution or to be victorious, then there has to be sacrifice along the way, because that's just the way our world is today. And that's what we need to make. We need to make change.
I think what's very interesting is in response to Extinction Rebellion, Palestine Action, Just Oil UK, the amount of new laws and repression the state is going into shows, it is effective. It is hurting people somewhere, and blocking newspaper distribution, etc. It does actually show that capitalism as a system is not strong. It is actually getting weaker and weaker by the day, as it's been shown in the whole economic situation as well. So sometimes it just takes a little bit of something to push it over the edge. But I do think Matthew has a really good point in terms of we need to have a strategy of where we're going with this, and hopefully we can go with it together. I think this is a good point to bring it to an end, unless, Jackie, you have another question or something. I think this was a really good discussion.
Brilliant conversation, and it's the kind of conversation I think those of us who are trying to change the world in all sorts of different ways need to be having more and more with each other.
Absolutely. We have, as a final treat for everybody, an interview, a pre-produced interview with a supporter of Celtic Football Club, which is often in the news with their stunts and their banners against the Queen, etc. And we've got a really interesting interview we'd like to share with comrades now, as before we finish this program. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
You're a Celtic fan, Paul, well involved in the kind of symbolic forms of protest we've seen at Celtic Park and away games. What is it about Celtic Football Club that a great many of the fans have got progressive left-wing views?
I think it really just comes exactly what you've said, Mike, from the very history of the club. I mean, the very inception of the club was born out of politics, a political decision that created genocide in Ireland, which obviously then, jumping forward, creates Celtic Football Club to very basically feed the poor in the East End of Glasgow. The reason for the club's being is politics. You know, the very reason for the club's being. And obviously that leads you to, before you even mention men like Michael Davitt, you know, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, who famously laid the first soddy turf at Celtic Park. Yeah. I mean, my initial really going to games all the time was the 80s. Hugely political time. Thatcher, the hunger strikes, anti-apartheid. I mean, these are the things, the literature, the conversations that are taking place, and a place that I always say I learned more than I learned at school, the jungle.
The last day's show was about, it was called Joy and Revolution, and we were talking about the joy of being in crowds, of being in large numbers. Generally speaking, when working class people join together, it's an intoxicating, heady, empowering thing. Can you describe your experiences in the jungle, Paul, what that's like when you've got a huge political banner, you're singing songs? Yeah. What's that like? What's your emotions like?
It is intoxicating, definitely. You feel a part of something. Walking up Janefield Street and you're being handed out leaflets about a demonstration, anti-apartheid demonstration, a troops out demonstration, Thatcher, all these sort of things. So these, if you're already politically aware but fairly naive at that age, the ground was set for you to be able to take all this information in. But one of the most important days regarding political advancement within the support in general would be probably one of the darkest days in our history, which was the Mark Walters incident at Celtic Park, which needs to be discussed. Well, Mark Walters wasn't actually technically the first black player to sign for a Scottish club, but it was projected as such in the media. Put a huge part to play in this as well, by the way.
Rangers creating a bit of history by having the first coloured player in the history of the club. Well, the game was slightly held up while some assortment of fruit was removed from the pitch. You can see it there, just in front of the jungle.
The shops in the East End of Glasgow were sold out of bananas, and that was a narrative that was going on. I mean, I realise the old adage, different times, that doesn't wash for me. It was poor, and that simple as that. It was beyond poor, obviously. I mean, in the jungle that day, and something that wasn't reported, there was people that were fighting back. Okay, I mean, supporters were fighting back against these people. I was only a kid, I was only about 14, 15. But I remember people attacking people for doing it, and it was just chaotic, man. However, from that, because I say sometimes that night is darkest just before the dawn, as they say, and that was when Celtic Fans Against Fascism came about. And that led to the TAL fanzine, and again, another publication, hugely important.
Is there a sense amongst those politicized Celtic supporters, I guess there has been, Paul, any efforts to reach out and build bridges with those supporters who are maybe more sceptical about bringing politics into Celtic Park?
Difficult question to answer that one, Mike, because I mean I've had countless debates with Celtic fans attempting to reach out on social media and stuff like that, and point out the origins of the club. But funnily enough, the last time I got a ban for Facebook, I've had a few, was for actually arguing with Celtic fans on pages regarding the Queen's funeral. So there you go.
Interesting.
There you go.
We've seen some fantastic disruptive, in a good way, banners and political statements, sometimes against the wishes of the Football Authority, sometimes even formally against the wishes.
It was exclusively against, to be fair.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's not the work you do and other Celtic fans do is not limited to Celtic Park. Can you describe a wee bit of the work that you bring into the community as well, and the political work that you do outside of Celtic?
I think it's a knock-on effect, Mike. I think it is a domino effect. So there has been various things we've got involved in collectively. I would say predominantly against right-wing groups, Scottish Defence League, obviously way back in the day, British National Party. But the work they guys do regarding charities, food bank collections, is phenomenal, and I think that has a knock-on effect as well, because I think that spikes people's consciousness.
Absolutely.
I think people that maybe wouldn't have as readily got involved in stuff like that for no other reason than just maybe apathy.
Well, we very often see Palestinian flags.
Yeah. I think we can just relate to the discrimination. I think obviously the inception of our club comes for genocide in Ireland, and the way that the people were treated in that country, and I think that just resonates, as does the Basque country, and as did South Africa. So there's a bit of this. Our critics tend to throw this jump on a bandwagon nonsense, which is just a cheap way trying to cheating what you're trying to achieve. And any human being that doesn't have sympathy for the people, the plight of the people of Palestine, I find a very strange one to digest, I have to say.
We had a Liverpool supporter on a few months ago, Paul, and they were describing that perhaps in Merseyside more broadly, but certainly amongst the Liverpool fans, there was a very strong left-wing element. And they, amongst a certain number of them, they had now taken to, if they were ever at a final and the national anthem was played, they were doing it. See other clubs around the world with similar kind of political traditions as Celtic Park?
Absolutely. Obviously, you mentioned St Pauli, a place I've been many a time. The Liverpool fans, what they've been doing the last X amount of years, obviously they've got great reason to be anti-authority and anti-establishment, the way they've been treated and portrayed in the media. And it's a great city in that regard. They stand up, they do, they stand up, and as the Everton, because I know many Everton fans as well. Obviously, you mentioned the booing of the national anthem. Wonderful, and this is the thing that annoys me about that, right? Because it gets reduced up here. It gets reduced to Celtic and Rangers, the royal family. You're either pro or against, and that's a nonsense. And that's where your working class connection comes, and that's something, a battle we need to try and win. Is to point out that, listen, this has nothing to do with your football club. Okay, I mean, this is your class. And I think the way we dealt with the death of the Queen, unapologetic. Because if you just went by the media, and I'm talking right across the board with the media, you would think the whole country was knee-bending capped offers that were just happy to accept this family ruled over them, and it was all right, everything was okay, their behaviour and their inherited wealth and privilege and all this stuff. And thank God for people like our club, Liverpool, Dundee United, Hibs, Hearts, these clubs that did.
And it spoke, didn't it, Paul? It spoke for a constituency out there who were silenced through all that period.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you're amongst fellow fans and you're in the jungle, and you're doing what you're doing in the community. You're making these symbolic protests at football match. How do you feel you are representing working people, even not just Celtic fans, or maybe not even the traditions of the club, but do you feel that you're voicing something on behalf of your class there?
I strongly believe we are. The biggest battle the new is, as I find, is again, it's modern media manipulation. People are very easily manipulated to believe, and I'll give you the best example of that one night. When we played Beersheva that night at Celtic Park, and that was publicised in advance that there was going to be some form of protest. UEFA had threatened to fine the club, sex news support, tell us not to do something, we'll do it 10 times worse.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that night was a great example of that. There's always been Palestine flags for as long as I can remember flying at Celtic Park amongst the support in greater or larger numbers, obviously. And that night, it's well publicised that it was a huge display that went worldwide. Now, I remember coming home for the game that night. What I found really interesting was the initial response from a huge section of the fan base, as I say, the Facebook Celtic supporters. It was even people I know very well that I was quite surprised that it was, you're embarrassing the club and we're going to get fined again and all this stuff. But then when it became evident how the pendulum was swinging on a worldwide basis, how positive this was being viewed the world over, people like Roger Waters and stuff like that promoting it at his concert, and obviously the Middle East, but not just that. It was a real ripple effect of positivity. But that was quite interesting that night, and to see how people could be swayed by how it was then starting to be represented in the media, the fight, match, the fine for Palestine and stuff like that, which had a huge effect.
That desire to be a disruptive element in a good way, even when you're being warned against it, because as you say, it can get the kind of traction and can seize people's imaginations in ways that you maybe didn't predict.
Yeah, definitely.
Listen, it's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely, Mike.
Fantastic meeting you.
Yeah, that was very interesting. I think they're very, just like St. Pauli, they're very spirited, and it does feel extraordinary being in the crowd there. It's also interesting to how he described how things can change with your stunt, with your direct action there. Jackie, do you want to say anything? Goodbye.
Also, what was really interesting is what he was saying is that there were some people objecting, but when they saw that the mass of the people were actually behind it, that actually gathers support. And that's where we've got to get to. That, and I think that's what the 3.5 is about. It's an attempt to put a structure in to get to that point. Anyway, great program, and hope everybody has a lovely week.
Yes, we're going to have time next week to discuss the issues further in our Have Your Say show. If any of the speakers or anybody from the audience wants to come back next week to answer some questions from the audience, you're more than welcome. Good night, comrades. See you next week.